Hello, sixth grade students. Welcome to our weekly brief. Today I'm going to just do two things with you, and then we will conclude with our weekly riddle. So the first thing that I want to do is remind you of our new call and response. And at the same time, I want to remind you about that literary device that we were introduced to last week, or I introduced it to you. Corey Ten Boom introduced it to you in the story too. For those of you who maybe aren't remembering, you're having to think back, here's a hint. It started with a P and it ended with an X. The word started with a P, ended with an X. Okay, so you be thinking about that. So number one, we are going to do the call and response. So the call and response is my call. Pride makes us artificial. Your response, and humility makes us real. Okay? And within this, I think there is, one could make an argument that within that is that literary device that we began to learn about last week. So let's see if we can remember it. I hope at home you're thinking about the literary device, and again, starts with a P, ends with an X. And remember, the paradox was Corey's imprisonment, and then the lieutenant who actually was in authority and her boss, and the boss of the prison, and a free man, but he felt imprisoned. So that in itself was this literary device. So anyway, the literary device, I hope you're saying it at home, or at whatever you're doing. I hope you're thinking about it, and I hope you're saying it, but it's paradox, okay? And just a friendly reminder, it would be great to have something to write with, like a composition notebook and a writing implement. But a paradox is a seeming contradiction, or even something that seems absurd, but after further investigation or an explanation, it actually contains, or it may contain, some kind of truth. Okay? So that's what a paradox is. That's the definition for paradox. A seeming contradiction, but actually after further investigation, it may contain truth. All right? Be thinking about pride makes us artificial and humility makes us real. Is there something in there paradoxical? You be thinking about it. And then just as a reminder, we read a short one-page thought to make our hearts sing last week called Topsy-Turvy. And the title Topsy-Turvy is lending me to think, ooh, maybe there is a paradox. And so within the topsy-turvy, let me just read it quickly to you to remind you. Not everyone heard this because not everyone was on this part of the Zoom call at the very end. So let's think about that definition, but let's see if this helps us have some better images and illustrations before us. Topsy-turvy. The true story of God coming to rescue his children is topsy-turvy good news. Jesus said, the way to be the greatest is to be the least. The way to save your life is to give it away. Jesus didn't come with wealth, he came as a poor man. Jesus didn't come as a general to grab power, he came as a baby. He didn't come to be the boss of everyone, he came to be the servant. And without fighting a single military battle, God's undercover prince conquered the world. In fact, the Apostle Paul says it so beautifully in 1 Corinthians 1 when he says, but God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. Okay, so that's topsy-turvy. Those are paradoxical. They seem to be contradictory, maybe even absurd, but within them there may be truth. And because it's coming from God, I know there is truth. And so paradox, a beautiful literary device. You will continue to think about it as we read the story of Corrie ten Boom and we think about things, prison, freedom. Can you be free and soaring when you're actually imprisoned in a cell? Can you be free and soaring if you can't visit your friends all the time? Anyway, just good questions. All right, I said 2 things. That was the first. The second thing I want to do is quickly introduce you to a worksheet that I sent you a couple of weeks ago called Avoiding Run-On Sentences. And that's probably the number one problem, technically speaking or mechanically speaking, in your writing. We've talked about writers have 3 problems. What am I going to say? How am I going to organize it? How to say it well? But technically and mechanically, it's run-on sentences. Run-on sentences are when you have more than one independent clause, 2 or more, and they are together acting like one complete thought when they're not. Okay, so before I do anything though, let's just review what an independent clause is. Let's review what makes a sentence a sentence. Okay, a sentence has a subject and a predicate and it makes complete sense. Okay, that's an independent clause. It can stand alone. And the problem is, you guys, is sometimes you put 2 independent clauses right next to each other. You're trying to link them together, but they should not be linked. They really need a coordinating conjunction. They need a comma and a coordinating conjunction, or they need you to separate them, or they need you to use a semicolon or a subordinating conjunction. And I'm just going to go over one example, okay? The one example I want to go over is this sentence. Please be writing this at home and thinking through this and trying to correct it on your own. She writes music, he plays the guitar. Okay? I should be looking at this and saying, wait a second. And maybe you are looking and saying, wait a second, Mrs. Schaefer, that does need a comma and a coordinating conjunction right here. Or it could be 2 separate sentences. Great instinct. Okay? So this is an independent clause right here. She writes music. That stands alone, okay? If you want to combine it with this independent clause, he plays the guitar, it needs punctuation and a coordinating conjunction and a few other, there are a few other ways to do it. So let's do this together. Okay, you're at home. So the most basic way to do this is to turn it into a compound sentence, okay? Compound needs that conjunction and, right? So I'm going to put she writes music and then my comma goes right there after the independent clause, and then I insert my coordinating conjunction and he plays the guitar. Now I have got a beautiful compound sentence, not a fused sentence, 2 sentences bumping into each other that should not be together, trying to be one. Okay, so I'm going to take, that's one way. Another way could be to actually just separate these 2 sentences completely. I would put a period here, and I could capitalize my H. She writes music, he plays guitar. Okay, great. There are 2 other ways. I'm wondering if you're thinking about them at home. You could become pretty sophisticated and use a semicolon, okay? And a semicolon should be used sparingly. And the thing about a semicolon is there needs to be within these complete thoughts something that connects them together, or connects the ideas together. And so what we could do in this instance would be to add the beautiful, helpful little prepositional phrase to each sentence. And so let's do this. Let's take she writes music for the band Coldplay. Okay. All right. plays the guitar for the band. Okay, and by adding these prepositional phrases, I can use a semicolon, and it makes a lot more sense because she writes music for the band Coldplay. He plays guitar for the band. This connection for the band Coldplay, for the band, that really connects those ideas together, gives them common ground. And you want some kind of common ground when you choose to use a semicolon, okay? So, and then lastly, the last thing you could do is you could use a subordinating conjunction. I hope you're thinking, oh, subordinating conjunctions. When you think coordinating conjunctions, you should be thinking that acronym fanboys, right? Subordinating conjunctions is the acronym www.asia.web, okay? And if I simply throw out the word while, the coordinating or the subordinating conjunction while to you, we could change this in a whole different way. So you could say while, this would become lowercase, while she writes music for the band Coldplay, comma, he plays guitar for the band, okay? So those are 4 different ways you can take a run-on sentence, a fused sentence, 2 independent clauses side by side that should not be trying to pose as one complete thought, but they need to either be separated or they need to be punctuated in a different way. 4 different options, okay? So the last thing I want to do, and I need to find it, we have to end with our weekly riddle, okay? So this week's weekly riddle. I have hands, yet I cannot shake your hand, cannot give you 5, and have no fingers. What am I? Never stop learning, 6th graders.